Hello, I'm Rebecca and this is video 2 in the series of videos that is for textile designers who need to combine scanned materials into a single Photoshop file and make a repeating pattern. So we have our 4 tiles together. There's lots of cleaning up we need to do. So the first thing probably to make our lives a bit easier is to brighten the whole image up. Get rid of some of this dark area. Then we can pinch some bits. So I'll zoom in to 100% and you'll be able to see that we've got quite a lot of noise and stuff going on. We'll get rid of some of this stitching or fabric texture as much as we can anyway, using levels. If you're really confident that you're happy with the position of everything, there's nothing more you can do to adjust it, then you'll probably want to merge all your layers down. You can do one at a time using the layers panel button. Just move that in a little bit so you can see the commands that pop up. We can use merge down. And that will merge one layer at a time. Do I want to apply the layer mask? Yes, I do. I've spent a lot of time painting it, so I definitely want you to adhere to that. So you can merge one at a time, or you can merge all the visible layers. So if I switch my background layer off and then merge all the visible layers, I'll still have a transparent background where those tiles sit, which is quite helpful really often. So they're all just a single layer now. It's called layer 3 because that was the topmost layer when I merged the whole lot down. So we're going to just use the levels command to try and brighten this what should be white area up. And you can do that from the image menu, adjustments, levels. And I'm just going to drag this right hand slider across and you can see that really brightens up the whites. You don't want to do too much. So another really nice technique is to just take this, what's called the sample in image to set white point little eyedropper. You can choose that and just click on the bit in the image that you want to become white. So that brightens that up quite a lot. Don't want to lose too much. Sometimes you have to kind of pull some of that mid-tone colour back in by sliding the mid-tone slider across. So don't go too far with that because you can end up over bleaching it. Always cancel and go back in again if you think it's a bit of a problem. You've done it a little bit too far. So I'll go back into my image menu adjustments, back to levels, and then I'll just grab my eyedropper and pick a fairly white area or fairly light area of that white so it doesn't strip it back too much, because we'll clean up these darker areas. Let's just go a little bit lighter. You can just keep clicking around until you're fairly happy with what you've got. So I'm going to go with that position there and click OK, but we will need to clean up some of this. So that's the first way we can clean up area. And zooming in, command 1, we can still see some of this texture that needs to be removed. We don't really want to lose any detail. We could try a filter to kind of blur it out. So filter, blur, surface blur could often give you a little bit of scope for removing that background texture, but you can see I'm losing a little bit of detail as well, so you have to be really careful about how much of a radius on the blur you want and how much of that image you're letting through to be blurred. So the higher the threshold value is, the more blurry everything will get. So you really want to keep that to a minimum. So you could try a little surface blur to try and blur out some of that texture, but really do it in small amounts. So radius at 1's not really doing a lot. to getting slightly better. 3, 4. 4's okay, it's still leaving a bit of detail in there. So I'm just going to go, okay, that's as much as I'm going to blur it. Don't want it too blurry. There's still some texture when you zoom in. So we'll do something. Oh, look, I've got a bit of a problem down here. I might have to steal a 12 from somewhere. So I've got a bit of a problem with some of this texture. And a lot of that can be resolved using a technique I use quite a lot to get rid of noise in an image. But it requires us having to go into the image menu, into the mode command, and changing it from RGB to lab color. What happens when you change a color from lab, I'm not going to merge those layers, is in your channels panel, you'll see you've got a lightness channel and an A channel with the magenta to green color information and a B channel with the yellow to blue color information. When they're both combined, you get all the colors. So this is our color data, but on the lightness channel, that tells us where light is. So if we just blur out the lightness channel, I'll just switch those other two channels off and zoom in. I like to zoom into 100% because that's exactly what I'm going to see. Then I can use a blur filter. I'll use that same surface blur on just that layer, and I'm not doing anywhere near as much damage to the overall sort of sharpness of the image. So that does clear off quite a lot of noise. And if you're a bit worried about it being too blurry, you could always try to bring in another filter that's really useful to try and sharpen it back up again. And I use sharpen, unsharp mask. So filter menu, sharpen, unsharp mask is a great way to try and crisp up those edges a bit. And the amount is how light and how dark your contours go. So you don't want to make that too much. And your radius is how thick. So I'm going to bosh these over to right very extreme, and you can see how with a very dark and light contour, you can see that these black and white lines appearing around areas. So you want to kind of make it fairly subtle and not too wide. And your threshold is how much data you're allowing to be unsharp masked, if you like. So if that's set at 0, every single bit of this image will be made slightly sharper. Like that a bit more. So my before, oh, and if I have a radius amount, so my before looked like that, and my after looks like that. So the only trouble is with unsharp mask, if you bring everything in, you end up sharpening up a load of noise. You've got to be a bit careful, but it's worth a try. So that's unsharp mask on my lightness channel. So switching the visibility of those, all those layers back on, we can see how we've cleared out. We've cleared out all that noise in as non-destructive way as possible. There's still some areas that we need to tidy up a bit, but that's cleaning up a little bit. My green twirls are a little bit iffy. They might need some tweaking later on, some more cleaning up. So now I've done that, removing of the texture, I'm going to go back into my image menu, mode command, and set that back to RGB. And I'm not going to merge those layers together. So that's a good bit of cleaning up, starting to look like it should. And we've got to borrow bits from parts of the illustration. And we'll start with this flower here in the middle that's missing a chunk. We're going to use this flower next to it to replace it. So using a selection tool, you can use your lasso tool and try and draw very carefully by hand. I'll just deselect that with Command D. You can use the select menu, deselect command. in this situation, the polygonal lasso tool that's hidden behind the lasso tool, you can access it by holding your mouse button down, is actually a bit more easy to use because you can just click little straight lines. And what we've got to do, if I zoom in so you can see more carefully, we've just got to be a bit careful around these bits where things touch. But other than that, you haven't got to really be too careful. I'm just using my space bar to move around. So that bit's quite a crucial bit. It can be quite sloppy in this bit, but from here to here is quite crucial. So I've got to be a bit careful there. And then I can go back to being a bit more slapdash. It's only when different parts of the motifs in your design touch, you've got to be a little bit more careful with this polygon lasso tool. So I'll be a bit more careful over here. Use my space bar to move around a bit. And eventually I'll come back around to the other side. And you can either wait until you've touched the start of your selection, or you can just double click to get that whole selection. I'm zooming out so you can see I've picked up that whole flower, and I'm just going to then use a copy and paste command. In the layers panel, I've just got my layer with everything on it, my running ants. But when I use Command or Control C, so Command C on the Mac, Control C on the PC, I'll be copying that flower as long as layer 3 is selected. And if I use Command V or Control V on the PC, I would have copied a brand new flower on that layer, and I've now got layer 4. And if you want to be super organized and know what each layer contains, you can name your layers by double clicking on the layer name. So I'll just change layer 4 to say spare flower. And hit my enter key to complete that. So with my move tool active, that top 4 arrowhead tool, I can pick up that spare flower and put it into position. So it's not quite right, it's not quite the right size, it's not quite the right angle. So I'm going to use free transform to just spin it around a bit, move it in position, and I'm not going to worry about the overlap things because we'll just use the layer mask function. So what I've got to do is just try and get that the right size, and using the same techniques as the previous video, we can drop the opacity a little bit so that we can see the shape we're aiming for. So we can scale it or right click and get to be able to warp it into a better fill for the gap that we're trying to cover up. So I'm going to replace the whole flower. I'm not going to try and match things in. I'm just going to really just replace the whole flower. In fact, I'm not quite sure this warp is exactly what I want. So I'll apply that, free transform it again, just spin it round a little bit, because I've got to really make sure I cover up all of the flower underneath. So I think maybe my angle's slightly wrong. So I think that could work a bit better. Spinning it round and squishing it between those two. I'll do another right click. This time I'm going to do a distort rather than a warp. Just change its shape very slightly. Stretch that down a bit. Move it across a bit. Just aiming for it to touch on there. So that's probably as good as I'm going to get that. I don't want it to touch those flowers at the top. And there's going to be an element of rubbing out what's underneath. So I'll whack that opacity back up to 100, but I'm going to just hide it a minute and actually rub out on layer 3 what I don't want on this flower. And for that, I'm going to use the Erasure Tool. And the Erasure Tool will always erase to your background colour, which when you click on the little reset buttons to you'll get the default foreground and background colours. So the default's white. So if I just rub out bits of this, I'll turn my background layer visibility on so you can see how that's turning white. I can get rid of this underneath flower. And then that will allow the other one to sit quite nicely on the top. So by rubbing out this one with the split in it, I'm kind of removing lots of conflicts with the flower that I've copied and sort of distorted a bit to fill that shape. Just increase the size of my brush with my keyboard shortcut, which is the bracket key, and just remove these bits. And then I might as well clean this bit up while I'm here. Then let's get rid of you because you're going to need the same treatment. So I'll get rid of this little one here. And maybe even this. No, I'll leave that blue blob there. Why not? Okay. I might get rid of this whole flower. A little section there, and I might get rid of this whole flower and this little section there, ready for later on. Okay, so I've gone a little bit far with that one, so I think I'm going to use my history panel just to go back a few steps to try and claw that edge of that flower back in. Where are you? There it is. Start again and be a bit more careful this time. Zoom in. Makes it a bit easier to work more accurately. That's better. Get rid of you. Get rid of you. I think I'm going to get rid of you as well. And you'll see how we can build up these bits later. You. Ooh. Go back a step. Control says good for just one step rather than going to the history panel. And let's go around. Oh, this brush is a bit ugly at the minute. I'm going to use a little shift click to chibble around this in a straight line. Okay, so this is the kind of cleaning up that you have to do. You have to use your brush, your eraser, and you can use a click, shift click to clean up in straight lines. I'll zoom out a little bit. And that is ready to have our spare flower stuck in the middle of it, which I'm not unhappy with. And then I'm going to do the same with this one here. I'll just tidy up this lumpy bit. And again, it's quite time consuming. You've got to take care with it. You've got to do little tiny steps. So I'm going to pause the video for a second while I just do exactly the same as I've done with the large flower with this little one. And then the only couple of more cleanups that we need to do are trying to get all the whites a bit whiter. So yeah, you can use your eraser tool, but I've got another technique with the dodge tool that is going to help with that. So that is a lot of our cleanup done. I'll duplicate the other flower and just use one last cleanup technique. So let me pause the video for a second. So I've got my two blue flowers. I just need to steal some of this orange and build the bottom of this with orange. And we can do that in a couple of ways. One of the ways that you can steal one part of an image and use it in another part is to use this little clone stamp tool, 5 down on the right hand side of your tool panel. And what you have to do when you use this tool is you have to alt click to say what you're stealing, and then move it, and then you can paint with it. Now I'm going to go onto my layer 3 and alt click to set where I'm stealing from, and then I can paint some orange in. And you'll notice as soon as I hit part of the flower, it's starting to clone in that as well. So you're constantly having to keep an eye on your crosshair so that you're aware of what it is you're duplicating. Now I'm going to undo that because that's not great. I only really want orange. So I'm going to increase my brush size with my clone tool by using my bracket key, and I'm going to alt click on some orange, and I'm going to paint some orange back in, and see that coming in. Don't want that there, so I'm just going to alt click again to a different part of the orange and steal some more. I'm not going to get too bogged down by this because I'm going to cover some of this orange with red flowers and blue dots. But you'll notice it's not painting on my flower because my flowers are sitting on their own layer for the minute, which makes it a bit easier to work with. So I'll just paint a little bit more orange in these bits, and I'm just gonna undo that actually, and I'll just reduce the size of my brush and just paint a little bit of orange there. I zoom in, be really careful. I'll just paint that leaf shape back in a bit more carefully than I have been doing. Like that. Let's tidy it up a tiny bit. Okay. So I'm just gonna make my brush really big, just steal bits of orange from other places, and often you need to just change that position quite a lot. Just keep clicking and changing it. So that's the clone stamp tool. There's some of this dark orange. Look a bit from the right, go over to the left, zoom out a bit. I'm not going to bother too much with that until I've straightened the whole thing up in the next step. But yeah, the clone stamp tool is a really great way of borrowing stuff. You can also use the lasso tool or the polygon lasso tool to just grab a bit and copy and paste it. Use your move tool to move it around. And often when I'm kind of stealing big chunks of the same colour, I'll use my Alt key and just sort of drag lots of copies of the same colour. I'm not too worried about this because, to be honest, I'm going to crop all these out. But each time I've Alt dragged that, you'll see I've got a whole load of new layers in my layers panel. I want to keep my flowers, so I'm going to turn their visibility off, and I want to keep my background layer. So I'm going to turn that visibility off, and I want to keep my layer 3. But what I do want to do is just merge all these visible layers together, this solid orange. So I'm going to use my burger button at the top right corner of my layers panel. I'm just going to say merge visible. So I'm back to a more manageable 4 layers now. So lots of cleaning up done. And our final tool in our arsenal for the orange is this tool here called the Spot Healing Brush tool, because I can use that just to rub over bits that aren't the right colour. I'll just make sure I'm on the right layer. In fact, I'm going to merge layer 4 down onto layer 3 because that orange is good. So I've just got my spare flowers. I'll keep those there on their own layer, because you'll see in the next video how we can create brushes of our petals and blobs, and that'll be easy to work with those flowers on a separate layer. So on layer 3 still, I'm just going to use my healing brush tool, or spot healing brush tool, that's the 4th one down on the right hand side, just to click over any little blemishes. And this is a great way of sort of blending in patchy stuff as well. So you can spend some time just trying to soften those very sharp edges that you might have when you're stealing bits of a solid colour and using it in different areas of an image. So that's a great tool for cleaning. And our final cleaning tool we can get rid of some of these dark areas with is this tool here, looking like a sort of fish shape. Hidden behind that we have something called the dodge tool, and the dodge tool looks like another lollipop the opposite way as our zoom tool. And I'm going to set this to affect the highlights. You can see here I can have it affect shadows, midtones, but highlights is what I want to change the exposure of. And the higher the exposure value, the more harsh this is. So we'll try with something a little bit soft, around about 20%. And I'm going to increase my brush size a bit, and I'm just going to kind of rub over it. And what happens is it's only lightening highlights. When I rub over dark areas, it's not having an effect. So this is a great way just to clean up some areas of the image that are a bit mushy without it affecting the darker bits too badly. So let's find some others up here. There we go, just rub over those, that'll clean those up a bit. So where things are a little bit muddy and there's darker areas in there that you don't want to get rid of, you can just use the dodge tool to clean things up. So that can really help with those existing dark areas. I'm going to undo that because I didn't want to make that little leaf dark. But yeah, with your white areas, it's a very useful tool to have. So that's as much cleaning up as we needed to do, really. We've got rid of lots of the darker areas of the white that shouldn't have been there. And we've stolen bits. So all that remains before we actually tile it is to just put our little flowers in this bit. So that's the end of the second video. I'm sorry it's nearly half an hour, but it's a pretty complicated process, this is. So thanks for sticking with the second video in the series.